today I'm going to I'm going to present to you a particular way of working with couples. It's based on a particular technique in couple therapy, and I cannot tell you enough how helpful it is. And I know that it will seem to you very affected, very structured, very unnatural to do it. And we can talk about it, but if you really open your mind to learning and listening about the principles of it, if you do actually have a spouse who's open-minded enough to be willing to try it with you as it is, you will see that it's actually very useful. And if not, then at least you will get some principles from it, which can be then applied in a slightly more, spontaneous way in your natural way of talking in the couple. So I hope that would be that would have been a good choice on my part. We'll see in a minute. I wanted to ask your opinion about whether you would like me to talk in one of our next meetings specifically about sexuality in the couple, in the married couple in midlife, because it's a very different thing. Every life is a little bit different, and our individual sexuality changes with age, and couples have phases in their life as a couple, and all of those things interact and create certain issues. For example, in the United States, there is in general in the population a much higher, I think, frequency than the average person would think of what we consider asexual marriages, especially around midlife. So, and what we know about sexuality in a couple is that it is actually a very important piece. When it's missing, it actually impacts greatly the feeling about the couple satisfaction and the individual feelings of each partner in the couple. So, and it definitely interacts with some of the issues that we're talking about in children of survivors. That kind of also interacts with every important aspect of our lives, so it also interacts with that. So I just wanted to ask you if that would be something that you wanted me to address or not. So let's start with today's. I wanted to start with this beautiful image that I showed you last time. Remember, we talked about our adaptations, which are the ways we learn to respond to things, the way we adapted to all kinds of messages, explicit and implicit, that we perceived in our environment. And that is not to say that we are blaming our parents or that our parents did or said such and such, because remember, even in the same family, people have very different perceptions of their parents and very different relationships with the same parents. So we call that phenomenon the co-construction of reality. Co-construction meaning that it is together constructed by the two participants, the features and characteristics of the parent and the features and characteristics of the child, and the way that works together. And the co-constructed relationship is different for every dyad. Why? Because we see, first of all, there's great variability in personalities. So, a child who needs a lot of relatedness will respond very different to a parent who's a little bit who's also very related and might be experienced by another child as intrusive, because that child needs more autonomy and less relatedness, or all kinds of other differences in personality. And also studies show us, and that will be, I will touch upon it when I talk a little bit about the third generation. Studies also show us that gender has a very important impact. It's different if it's the father with the daughter, or the father with the son, or the mother. So there are a lot of differences, and each child co-constructs their own reality. Okay, so we're talking about those adaptations, the ways we learn to respond to all kinds of things, the ways we learned what we like about ourselves and what we don't, what is likable about us, what is lovable about us, what is intolerable about us, what is too much about us, and our parents were like, that was too much for them and they couldn't handle it. All of those things are our old adaptations, and they essentially are these rigid structures of the adult, this cage, that becomes very rigid and in some ways restricts our repertoire of possible responses to the reality of the here and now and the person that we are now with in a relationship, because that person is not our parents. That person is different, but we respond to them in many ways from our past. So the point of discussing it is because we are looking at our couple relationship as a second chance in life. It's a second chance for us to actually, if we want to do what I called last time when we spoke, I said what we want to do is we want to make our current relationship a conscious relationship. So a relationship that is not dictated by the automatic, habitual, old adaptations that we learned from our childhood, but we want to become conscious of them. We want to be able to see what it is that we're doing, what it is that our partner is doing, what it is that we didn't get, what needs we are actually expressing now that are so important to us, and they are, and sort of make it conscious so that we can figure out new, more appropriate, more creative ways to respond to each other's needs in the present. So what is also very, very important to remember from last time was the point that I said that conflict is actually an opportunity. I think I have a thing about it later on. Conflict in our intimate relationship is an opportunity in two ways. One is that the people who developed imago therapy really took it a bit too far, in my opinion, where they said that at least in choice marriages where we chose, or where somebody said to me last time, maybe we didn't quite choose in an arranged marriage, but we had the option of saying yes or no. So that's also a choice, to some extent. So the idea is that we choose the imago that we have internalized. We go, if you recall, I said, we go in the world and go, not you, not you, not you, not you, not you, not you, but you, because there is something about you that feels very familiar. Familiar is not necessarily all good, because if I said if our mother was depressed, and that depressive tone is a very familiar thing for us, we may actually hone in on that depressive guy and not on this guy who's really happy and positive and whatnot. But anyway, even if we did not choose, and if we don't take it that far, if we are in a relationship and we want to make it work and we want it to be a conscious relationship, we have to look at conflict as an opportunity, especially those conflicts that are repetitive. The same thing that creates a conflict between us and our partner again and again and again, those repetitive themes are a very good like light that is shining, that if we want, we can look at it and see what are we stumbling upon. What in us are we stumbling upon through that conflict? The conflict calls for our attention to see an underdeveloped part of ourselves, a need that is very important to us that has not been fulfilled, something that is very important to us that is being grated on and annoyed and irritated repeatedly, gives us the opportunity to look at it and see what does it wake up in terms of our older defensive the things that did not get fulfilled and the defenses that we learned. So when I think, my patient today who cried in the morning, her husband did something and she came very tearful and said, he did whatever he did. It wasn't such a big deal. But for her today, it grated on the fact that nobody ever listens to my feelings. And in her family, that was her experience. She never was listened. She always had to be the parentified child. She had to take care of everybody. Her feelings were not listened to. and nobody ever took care of her. She was the child who took care of her parents. So when he doesn't do something, it wakes up all of that and the way that she responds to it. So, here is just, in choice marriages, sometimes you get this, the same thing that was kind of a cute quirk when you met the person and you were all excited and infatuated, becomes the thing that you just can't stand about them anymore. And that's when exactly did all the stuff you love about me become all the stuff you hate about me? Which is really another view of the same thing, that we choose somebody that has certain things that initially we are attracted to, and then it turns out sometimes that these are exactly the things that are like something very important in our childhood relationships that makes it very difficult for us. So here is a good picture to remember. This is a picture of an iceberg, just to remind you all, that the top part is what we know about ourselves, what we are aware of, but all of us have a very deep part that's sunk deep under the water. And that part is very, very important and very influential in the way that we respond every day. I always say, I bet you, if I asked you, each and every one of you, about what was the most annoying or upsetting interaction you had in the past week with your spouse, if I had enough time, and it only would take about a half an hour, I would be able, if we talked about it, to show you how it goes exactly to something that's very deep in your childhood adaptation. So please remember, we all have that deep icebergs in the deep, as we call them. And here is a very brief sort of summary of the main points that I would like to touch upon today and next time. We have to identify our own icebergs, meaning what are some very deep issues, themes, and adaptations that we are not so aware of. We can become aware of them through especially conflicts with our partner. So this is why a conflict can be looked at as such an important opportunity. We have to reevaluate when that conflict brings to light something that, you never listen to me. That feeling, you never listen to me, or nobody ever takes care of me. I'm the parentified child, and like this patient, and nobody ever takes care of me. I'm not saying that this is what I would say to her today, as she was very tearful and in this very activated state. But next time, I may discuss with her whether it is actually still currently so. Is she really not ever taken care of? Or when her husband has a moment where he doesn't respond in the way she would want, how quickly that feeling comes up. And we have to evaluate sometimes to which extent it is still relevant and accurate in the present. We can't expect the other to fix past hurts. What's done is done. It cannot be fixed by our partner. All we can expect of our partner is to be a really good partner in the present, and each of us has to take responsibility to some extent for the wounds that we carry. The other person cannot fill the void, the hole, fix the wound. We have to do part of the work, and then they can do part of their work to be a good partner that doesn't continue to deepen that hole. We have to identify strengths. That's very, very important, a point from positive psychology. It's very important for us to identify our own strengths, our unique individual strengths, and our partner's individual strengths, and use them as much as we can. So we will talk a little, we talked about the strength of the second generation, and I will go back to it in the following conversation, because today I really want to get to the imago quickly. We spoke about the strengths, and it's very important for each of us as a mature adult to come to recognize what are our unique strengths. Our unique strengths, which we talked about as children of survivors. Look at them again and see, and your individual strength. If you get to experience to use them as much as possible. If you know your strength, then when there is an issue, when there is a task, when there is a conflict, or just in life, the more opportunities you have to approach things from the direction of your strength, the better you will feel. Same is true about your partner. You need to identify their strengths and approach them or help them exercise as much as possible their strength and get reinforcement from it, from you, because it creates a much better positive feeling for each of the people and for the couple together. So amplify the gifts that the other person actually has, which we sometimes don't do so well. So we meet somebody and we actually choose them often, or we like the fact that they have other aspects that are very underdeveloped in us. So it's great that my husband can do all the, taxes and the insurance and all that number stuff that I get bored to death by. But then when I want to speak with him about some emotional issue, I am very frustrated that he doesn't have the same emotional intelligence and verbal abilities that I have in expressing myself. It's not fair. He has those strengths. He brings them to me. It's a very wonderful thing for me. Why do I then blame him for not having my strengths? So we have to sort of learn to deal with that, but we'll talk about that another time. The main thing that I want you to focus on as we, in the rest of today's meeting, is it's really all about communicating constructively. It's about learning how to say very important things that we have. We have to say some very important things to our spouses, especially the things that involve conflicts of needs, conflicts of opinions, all kinds of things that are loaded. These are very important things that we have to talk about, and we want to tell them to our spouse. But we often don't say them in a way that the spouse actually is likely to hear them. We say them, critically. We say them in a way that does not go, as I say, you have to say it in a way that goes easily into the ear. If it goes in a way that hurts the ear, then they're not going to hear you. You may have the momentary experience of release of bad feeling, but it is not going to be constructive communication that bears in mind the benefit of the relationship. Yes? So if we have to talk about something that is very important to us, we're very upset about it, or it's very important to us, we know it's going to upset our spouse, or it's a loaded issue, then it is our responsibility. We want to be heard. If we want to be heard, we have to say it in a way, we have to take the responsibility to say it in a way that goes easily into the ear of the other person and allows them to hear us. The listener also has responsibilities. The listener has responsibilities to really try to open their mind, to really presence themselves fully, which we find a little hard to do in the lifestyle that we all live these days. We're all very busy, we're all very hurried, and we don't really find it easy to fully presence ourselves with the other person and give ourselves the feeling that right now I'm fully here, right now I have all the time in the world for you. It's not really as if we need 3 hours for the interaction. It's more about when I'm here with you right now for the half hour, I am fully here with you, fully. I'm not thinking about what I need to do. I'm not thinking that I wish it were over already. I'm not wondering what's coming into my cell phone right now that I'm not noticing, but really fully here, okay? And the listener's responsibility is to also make sure that that this is a good time. If you want to have an important conversation, ask first if this is a good time to have it. Maybe it's not a good time to have it. Then what's the point pushing it? You won't get good listening. But if the other person says, no, it's not a good time right now, well then, one thing has to be clear. It is then their responsibility to find a good time and offer you an alternative time in a reasonably, reasonably soon. Their responsibility, once it is a good time, once it was decided that it is a good time, the listener's responsibility is to really presence themselves, as I said, and make sure that we quiet down the chatter in our heads, because there's a lot of chatter going on in our heads all the time. Sort of breathe in deeply. It quiets down our, parasympathetic, nervous system, and really presence yourself. Put your feet on the ground. It helps to put the feet on the ground and open the body. Never in a discussion, never sit like this. Pay attention to your body. Pay attention to your facial expressions. Pay attention to the eyes. There is such a thing as hard eyes and soft eyes. And all of these things we see very clearly in neuroaffective studies, that our brains are unbelievably sensitive to it. And when you look like that at the other person and it's a bad look, you might as well give up the conversation because you're done. So what I want to teach you is this very simple technique. It is, some of you are familiar with it, some of you are not. I know that it's very difficult to do without somebody helping you do it in the couple, but I still think that it's worthwhile for you to hear about it and to be able to get something from it that you might take home. First of all is the issue that if you want, like I said, if you want to have an important conversation, you have to invite the person, you have to ask if it's a good time. And even once it's a good time, what I suggest, and there is good reasons why I suggest that we do it this way, I suggest that you sit in front of each other like this, on the same level chairs, not next to each other like that, and not far away from each other. There's a huge difference if you're sitting on a couch and you're, a meter away from each other and you're talking like that, as opposed to in front of each other as close as you can. And when I say as close as you can, I mean really close like this, because optimally what we want is the distance between the two eyes, the two sets of eyes, to be about 18 inches, which is the optimal distance for empathic resonance in the brain. So that's why we do it that way. We do the presencing, and then we do what I call, and it's not my invention, this is that's why that comes from the imago therapy and from encounter-centered therapy, which is what I trained in, which is the Jewish version of imago therapy, crossing the bridge. So in crossing the bridge, why we call it crossing the bridge? Because we use the metaphor, and I think it's a good metaphor for all of us to keep in mind. Think about each of us as olam umlo'o. Each of us is a world unto itself. Each of us is a country unto itself. Each of us has its own country, its own language, its own culture. Yes, we speak the same words, but really, all of the important words, and even the less important words that we use, when you say, whatever it is, when you say a tree, you think probably automatically and naturally of the trees that grew where you grew up. I think of the trees that grow up in Jerusalem. So even when we say the same thing, each of the words that we use is soaked and loaded with our own personal history. When you say a mountain, you think of I don't know which mountain. I think of the Judean mountains. Yes, we each have our own imagery and our own, not only with regards to objects, of course, but especially with regards to other things such as emotions and all of those things, and memories. So if we look at each of us as a country unto itself with its own language and its own culture, then think of a conflict or a discussion as an opportunity to say to the other person, I would like to talk to you about something that's very important to me. I'm asking you to come visit my inner world. I'm asking you to come and visit my land, my country. I'm asking you to come and listen to the language and to the culture in my country. And as a host in my country, when the person comes to visit me, my responsibility as a host is to be a gracious host. I'm supposed to explain my culture and why I'm feeling this way and why I'm doing things this way in a way that will be easy and pleasant for the visitor to understand. The visitor has to be a gracious visitor. You know, I remember when I was a young kid in Israel, and I did something for the Jewish agency. The American groups of kids would come to visit for the summer, and they would take us, a bunch of Israeli kids, to be with them so that they would have a much more real experience and connections and all of that. And I remember how offended we would be sometimes when the kids would be ungracious and they would say, where I come from, it's such and such and such and such, and the pizza is so much better, and and we'd be like, that's not nice, right? You have to be a gracious visitor that tries to respect what they're being shown and not immediately judge it against their own concepts. So what we say, essentially, the metaphor is, I'm asking you to come over the bridge to my world. And when I'm asking my spouse, and it's a good metaphor to keep in mind, and each of us should sort of think of a long bridge, as long as you need it to be. And when you say, I'm asking you to come over to my world to listen to me, imagine both of you a very long bridge, as long as you need it to be, the kind of bridge you need it to be, and walk over the bridge to my world. And when you come to the other person's world as the visitor, we say you come only with your visa, your passport, who you are, and your visa, the permission to be here. You don't bring any other stuff with you. The other stuff is your thoughts, your responses. Think about it. When we talk to our spouse and we have some conversation in a normal, natural way, often when I teach my students or when I teach professionals to do this, what we do is we take one couple, with the students it's a videotape, but in workshops, let's say, we take a couple and we say, have a conversation that you have repeatedly, a loaded conversation, start having it here. And after 10 minutes, we stop it, and then we do it in a dialogue form to show them the difference. Why? Because when we usually talk with our spouses about a conversation that has, the same conversation that we always have about something that's very loaded, you can see that when the person is speaking, the other person is very busy with their answers to it. No, but it wasn't like that. But no, but I didn't say it like this. But no, but you don't understand. But I meant like this. And they put a lot of their stuff verbally into the conversation. And also, mentally, we are continuously busy with what we have to say about it and what we have to say in response. That is actually a very self-defeating exercise, because really we know what we are thinking. We already had this conversation 17 million times with our spouse and it didn't get anywhere. The only chance for it to be something new is if we actually put our stuff in a pickle jar on the side. It's not going anywhere. It hasn't gone anywhere in all this time. It's not going anywhere now. It will wait there for you. But for now, the new thing that we can do is to empty our mind of all of our stuff and really listen to the other person with genuine curiosity. Genuine curiosity about how come this person that I care so much about has such a different opinion about this thing or has such an issue with this. What would happen if I really opened my mind and listened to them from their shoes, from within their shoes, from within their skin, or so to speak, from within their country, their language, their culture? What would happen if I actually listened to what they're trying to say to me? So that's what we try to do. And then that is what the listener or the visitor is trying to do. Now, in the dialogue, another thing that people do often, when we talk to our spouse and we want to say something, we often go into long, long monologues, right? Which make it very difficult. And we often do it because we're so anxious. When we're anxious, we always talk more. and it makes it very hard. But really, you'd be surprised if you really thought about what it is that you want to say to the other person. Usually, it can be said in one or two very simple sentences. So, yeah, it can. We can afterwards clarify. But the main point of what really hurts us, or what we want to talk about, can be usually said in two sentences, which afterwards we can expand on. So first of all, the person who says there's something very important I want to talk to you about needs to say whatever it is. Give me an idea. I would like to talk to you about our plan to move to the city. I would like to ask you to postpone it by a year. Let me tell you, that's a conversation I'm going to have with my husband. He's not going to be happy about that. So, okay, it's a big deal. It's two sentences. It's very loaded, but that's what it is. And give me another example. Something that you think is was a very loaded thing for you, for somebody else. Let's see, can it be said I want to talk to you about something very important. I would really like to move to Jerusalem.
Question: what if they don't want to talk?
That's a different matter. If they don't want to talk, then there's nothing we can do. But the question is, in that moment, we can ask for a different time. Is there a different time? Could you tell me when it would be a good time? But to say to your spouse in a committed relationship, there is a topic I just don't want to talk about, is really not very acceptable. And if that person really stays with that opinion, then it's a real problem in a relationship, which maybe requires somebody else to help, because we can't go anywhere with that.
Question: what about topics that are loaded, such as, why do I always have to remind you? Why do I have to say the same thing over and over?
I want to say something very important to you. It's very hurtful to me that I feel that I have to say the same thing to you over and over again, and I feel that you don't take me seriously. No, how many sentences was that?
Question: but then the other person could say, you tell me this all the time. Why are you bothering me with this?
Well, you see, the problem is that in committed relationships that have been already, so many years, we have those repeated conversations. The problem is we can look at it as, oh, this is once again the same conversation and nothing will change. Or we can recognize that if it is a repeated conversation, there is something very deep here which is not being resolved. There is some very important need here which is not being responded to, which is not being fulfilled. And at some point, maybe we're willing to sit down with each other and say, let's actually try to address it. Let's actually try to do something different and better about it. It's the ones that are repetitive that are particularly worthy of such an effort, because clearly they're not going away. There's something with a very deep root there. Okay, let me go on for a minute. Now, the person who says what they have to say, like for example, it really hurts me, has to always stay with I statements. Constructive communication cannot be blaming, cannot be shaming. And that's really part of what cannot go well into the ear. When we blame the other person, you never listen to me, you never do this, that's not going far at all, right? So no blaming, no shaming. Whatever we have to say, we can say. Even the most loaded things, but it has to be said in a certain way that's not blaming, not shaming, and always I statements. I feel this and that. Now, that's another very important thing, which, by the way, is very important even in our relationship with ourselves, to always remember, first of all, I feel this way, and second, often to remember that there's a difference between a feeling and reality. Sometimes when we're triggered, we have a very strong feeling, and we feel a certain way. But we always sometimes remember that there were other times when we felt very strongly about something when we were triggered, and afterwards when we weren't triggered, it seemed a lot less terrible. So to remember to to take that distance from it and to say, I feel very hurt when it seems to me, or when I feel that you're not listening to me. Short sentences. And then here is the problematic aspect for all of us. We want the other person, the visitor, to actually repeat what was said in as close a way as possible to the original words and the music of the speech that was used by the other person. But not parroting it mechanically, but really taking the time for the statement, like what you said, to sink in, and then repeating. I hear you say, and you always start with that. And believe me, you can even become so good at it that you do it naturally without having a dialogue. I hear you say that you're very hurt when you feel that I don't listen to you and I don't take you seriously. Did I get you, or am I with you? Okay? You take the moment for the person's statement to sink, so that it doesn't seem like you're throwing it back right away, and you say it in the same way, the same words, the same music. Why? Because as soon as we add something, think about it, and notice it in your next conversations. When you talk to your spouse, and they're saying something very important, and you paraphrase it, as soon as you paraphrase it, which we do because we think that that means that we really paid attention and that we really understood them. But often we introduce a certain little difference there, and now all of a sudden they have to explain to us why, no, that's not exactly what they meant this, and we're now already not in the main issue which they wanted to talk about. So we want to repeat exactly the same. And that goes back and forth, let's say 10, 15 minutes. You know, you say, it hurts me, I feel hurt when that happens, and then the other person actually wants to listen as much as they can, which is not what we do in a regular fight. In a regular fight, we don't ask the person to tell us, tell me more. But here is a new trick. We say, tell me more. And so you say maybe what? You say, when that happens, it makes me feel like you don't really care about what my feelings are. And they say, I hear you say that when that happens, makes you feel like I don't care about what your feelings are. Did I get you? She goes, if he got you, if that was exactly so, you say yes. And then I, as the visitor, go, tell me more. Tell me more. And that goes back and forth like this. Or if I didn't get the main point, or I lost a very important piece, you don't say, no, that's not what I said. Because our brain has a problem with that type of a reaction, and it shuts down. So what we say instead is, almost, let me add, and we add the other piece. Or, let me repeat. We just don't say the no. We just go to let me repeat. Now, remember, what I'm saying to you right now are steps in a particular technique of talking in that way with the other person. But if you just take these principles and use them anyway in your conversations, you will already have a benefit of it. That when the other person says something and you want them to understand you and they didn't get most of it, if you say, no, that's not what I said, you're already getting their defenses up. You're waking up entirely defensive, apparatus in them. Instead, just say, let me add, or almost, let me say, that's already a benefit if you just take that with you. So, if he didn't get it, you say, let me say it again, let me repeat, or almost, but let me add also, and also, whatever they missed. It goes back and forth like this until the person who hosted feels that they got their say about this particular thing. And we also have to be aware of that. A lot of us did not, as second generation in particular, did not feel that our feelings had a lot of room in the relationships because our parents were very burdened with a lot of things, and they often did not make too much room for that type of a conversation. What did you feel? And tell me about it, and tell me more, and not exactly. was not part of the typical family atmosphere and intergenerational interactions. So a lot of us are walking around with a certain feeling that there's no room for it, and we don't trust that there's room for it, and we don't really feel heard. So what we have to deal with is the irrational hole that is left in us, which sometimes makes us, if we have an opportunity, then we talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about everything all at once. When in fact, if the dialogue was about, I would like to talk to you about the fact that it's very hurtful to me when I feel that you don't listen to me, then it needs to be about that, and not about 17 other topics in the relationship. And also this and that and that and that, and your mother and your father and your sister. Not about all the possible other issues, but just about that. And that is what we want. And then when that is done, then the other person can say, okay, let me summarize now in my own words. If you are now the visitor, you can now summarize in your own words what you think you heard. In your own words, what was the main message? So if I were the visitor in a dialogue about that sentence, for example, or that sentiment, I would say something like, okay, so what I heard you say is that it's very hurtful to you when I don't listen to you. And when that happens, it makes you feel like I don't care about your feelings and it doesn't matter to me how you feel. And maybe I would add into my summary a few other things that you might have said. Like, for example, and when that happens, what scares me is that I'm all alone, that you really don't care about how I feel, and you just roll over me. Or so I would maybe throw that in there. And maybe I even said, and what it reminds me of my childhood is that that's the way it always was. My parents really didn't have the time to think about it or to care about it. And I've always felt this way, and I don't want to feel this way in my relationship for the rest of my life with you. I was hoping for something different, and I want it to be different. And maybe I would include that in my summary, right? And I also heard that it reminds you of how you felt with your parents, and that you really want it to be different between the two of us, and that you really want life to be different. Okay, so that's what we would say. And the last piece, so we have the mirroring, which is what I talked about before, right? You make your statement, what it is that you wanted to talk about. It's the most important topic for now. You make it in a way that makes it easy for the other person to hear. You go back and forth on it in that way. When you feel you had your say and that the person got you, the person can summarize what they got in their own words as the main message. And then what we want to develop in each of us and in our spouses is the capacity to empathize with the other person's feeling, even if we don't agree with that. It's a very difficult thing for a lot of us to do, but it's a very, very important thing, because that's the thing really that allows past injuries and accumulated injuries in the relationship to become past. That's how we clean injuries. Because let's be honest about it. There is no way that we can live with somebody for decades and not create debris. We create debris. We eat, we create debris. We have a relationship, there is debris. There is injuries, there's accumulated all kinds of things, sometimes bigger things. How can we clean it? I have a couple who I just have been seeing now for the past a few months. They have been married since they were 21. He was 21 and she was 20. They were the first, partners of each other. They've been married they're 70 now, 70 and 69. She discovered 2 years ago that 30 years ago he had an affair. He had a big career that took him away a lot. She was very trusting. She thought they had a great marriage. He had an affair for a while. And then what happened was that the affair ended. He ended the affair. The woman moved to London. And over 30 years, they kept some kind of a connection. I believe him, actually. she doesn't, but I actually do believe him, that it was just this kind of slightly flirty back and forth, nothing sexual. They never met, but like happy birthday and this and that, just to kind of, his career went down the tube, by the way, over the last few years, so he's feeling very low. And this was a nice way to kind of have a little fantasy bubble that reminded him of his glory days and his affair and his whatnot. And it was a little bit of a fantasy bubble that he sucked on like a hidden lollipop here and there. Okay, she discovered it not in a nice way. No, the woman came from London. There was a reunion of the old workplace, and the man actually was going to meet her for lunch, and worse than that, he was going to have his wife drive him. Anyway, so she found out, and you know, why am I telling you this? Because she was a very reasonable woman, and she was going to be able to let the affair from 30 years ago be something that happened, past, okay? She was willing to. What made it into a major crisis that may end their marriage is the fact that he was unable to man up and to say, I am so sorry, this is what was, right from the beginning. Like, this is what was, this is what happened, this is what I did, this is what I didn't do, right from the beginning. Instead, for 18 months before they came to me, she had to, what she said, waterboarded him. She had to waterboard him, and every time another piece came out, and sometimes the pieces did not match, and so she was obviously feeling he was lying to her and hiding. And what she felt was that what was the problem was that he was being not empathic to her suffering now. It wasn't anymore about the affair then. It was like, right now, it came out. You can either man up to your contribution to my distress right now and help me feel better, or you can try to cover your behind in different ways, like you don't care about what I feel, right? And since it went for 18 months like that, there's a lot of suffering. So what am I saying? The only way that we can make something an offense, even a serious offense, the only way that we can make an offense or an injury or a hurt become past and be able to move forward is if we actually show empathy to what happened to the other person, to how they were made to feel, and some recognition of our contribution to why they feel the way they feel. Even if we don't necessarily accept how they see it or accept fault for it, but we have to be able to see how they feel, why they feel this way, and why, from their perspective, what is our contribution. Okay? So, for example, let's say if we take the man who doesn't, what was it? I say the same thing to you each time and you don't listen to me, and it makes me feel like you don't care about my feelings, right? So, and then I imagine that the person might give some examples, right? For example, when you come home and you throw your socks, okay? My daughter, bless her, she likes to throw her socks everywhere. I have socks everywhere when she's in the house. I could do that, right? I could say, you know, when you come into the house and you throw this pair of socks here and that pair of socks there, so when you come into the house and you throw for example, I'll give you another example. My patient who said, I come from work, the children are in the basement playing with, my wife is upstairs, nobody comes to say hello to me. I feel like I don't count at all. Okay? So one could say, the wife could say, what do you mean? You know, I don't, it's not, I'm just busy upstairs. You come in, you know, she may feel like she comes from a different house, a different home where it wasn't the case. It's not that she doesn't care that he came home, but she wasn't raised this way and she thinks it's normal. And to her, in fact, when in previous conversations, when he said, why don't you come to the door to say hello to me? She's like, what do you think? I mean, what, are you the king that just came in and everybody has to come and, you know, we can have different opinions and different perspectives, but if he comes in a conversation like that, if she's able to say to him, I can understand that when I don't come to the door to greet you and the kids don't come to the door to greet you, you feel like we don't care about you and it doesn't matter to us that you are now in the home. Regardless of what she feels, right? Regardless of what she feels, it's not an acknowledgement that she did something wrong. She may not think that she did something wrong. But especially, and this is the one piece that I want to add, if possible, if we still have a few moments, this is where knowing our own and our spouse's past and childhood meaningful history is very important. Because if this woman knew a lot about her husband or what some of the important themes would be, she probably could say, and I can imagine that when I don't come to the door and the children don't come to the door, and she doesn't have to even necessarily say it in that moment, but it's in the back of her mind, and sometimes we may even actually say it. I can imagine that when that happens, it reminds you of how things were when you were growing up and such happened. The such and such happened is something that we need to find the time to get to know. If we don't, even stories that we heard, it's a question of to which extent we give them room in our interaction with our spouse in the here and now. Is it like, yeah, I heard your stories? Or is it, I'm actually allowing myself to take in what are the main themes? What happened to my spouse? How did he feel at home? What did he learn in the relationship that he might be bringing to our relationship here now? Which is why I really wanted to ask you all, if possible, I put a piece of paper and a pen on each chair, and I wanted you to do this. I wanted you, if possible, to take a few minutes. I will collect it. Don't put your name on it. Don't put your name on it if you don't want. I want you to write this. This is it's an example of a dialogue that you can have at home with your spouse, with this new appreciation of how important it is for us to learn how the other person thinks or feels about these things, these parts of the iceberg that are sunk in the deep. What do they feel they bring with them from childhood, so that we will become more aware of how it acts in our relationship in the present. So I'm asking you to now answer on the blank piece of paper for me what I learned about relationships in my childhood was, and I'm not asking for an essay, I'm asking for a couple of sentences. For example, and I won't give an example. Just what I learned about relationships in my childhood was, and put down whatever comes to your mind. And then how I adapted to survive in my family was, and put whatever comes to your mind. How this adaptation has affected my adult relationship is, put whatever comes to your mind.
Question: what if I don't have a spouse?
Can you fill out the first part? What I learned about relationship in my childhood was, and how I adapted to survive in my family was, okay? And you might think, whether you have or you don't have a spouse right now, you might think, and how this adaptation has affected my adult relationship. For example, I have a patient who's very clear about the fact that she doesn't, I spoke with her in fact today, that she doesn't have a spouse because of such and such and such in her growing up and in the way that she felt about relationships growing up. So sometimes it's relevant even if we don't have a spouse. Actually, she's saying, this is how it affected my adult relationship, that I don't have a husband. So how it affected your adult relationship with that spouse, for example. And the last point is very, very important. When you actually do it, you don't have to fill it out right now, or if you want, you can. fill out what do you appreciate about your spouse now. The point is that these are very, very important things to become aware of, and it's a very important for a starting little dialogue in which if you have a spouse that you think might be open enough to doing it with, it's a relatively good, safe one to start with.
Question: how did you survive during your childhood? What do you mean survive?
Okay, so let me tell you something. It's not just about traumatic things, yes? It's just about how we adapt and survive, not in the sense of surviving a terrible thing, but sort of making our space and managing and surviving within a certain family. So let's say in a family where the daughter is not supposed to be very opinionated and intellectual. She's supposed to be nice and related and put the needs of other people ahead of herself and not be too forward. So in that kind of a family, which can be a very good family, but that was the family atmosphere. In my early relationships, I learned that I need to be not too opinionated and hide how smart I am. So the way I adapted was whatever, right? Just as an example of something very benign, but still part of a certain family culture, right? Okay, now, I do think that if you have a chance to try this at home, it would be an interesting exercise. I will think about it. This is all anonymous, completely anonymous. The reason that I want to look at it is because when I speak about, first of all, I wanted you to have this general idea, because even if you don't use it in the technique that it is, the idea of thinking about it when you next time have something loaded to talk about with your spouse, to think about emptying your mind and listening in this constructive, empathic way of listening to the other person. The idea of really trying to understand what the other person is saying as opposed to be busy with what we are thinking, which is not going away. It's going to wait for you. Free your mind and really listen to them. The idea of responding in a very empathically resonating way, close to what the other person said, really presencing yourself, really being there, and really listening and responding in that way, summarizing in a as good a way as you can, and checking with the other person if you got them correctly, asking for more. All of those things you can use in a conversation even if you are not using the technical structure of this dialogue, and it's all about a more constructive, more empathic way of speaking with one another. But on top of that, why I asked you for this is because for second generation, the research has shown that there are some very common icebergs in the deep that we share. There are certain concerns about relationships, about our parents, that we have all come to internalize on a very deep level, and we have each adapted to that concern in a different way. For example, anger, okay? It is a big, big finding, yes, robust all over the world. We have an issue with hostile feelings. We were not supposed to express it towards our parents, who we knew had been through a lot, who were very, very, who suffered a lot. We knew that we couldn't do it, who sometimes were very triggered in when hostile feelings were normatively hostile feelings in the family, siblings fight or the child is upset about something, they were triggered by it. And also, anyway, let's just put it this way, we have a hard time with expressing our own anger in the relationship. That's one of the things, if I were to answer as a typical second generation, the way it comes through the studies about anger, I could easily say what I learned about relationships in my childhood was that anger is unacceptable, it's very dangerous, it's very hurtful, and I cannot express it, right? And how I adapted to survive in my family was I did not express it. I hid it. I didn't speak about it, whatever it is, okay? But the thing is, like I said, different children of survivors adapted in different ways. Some children became very, very obedient and very afraid of their own aggression to the point that they can't even be assertive in relationships. Some people became passive aggressive because, hey, that's a way from the back door to say whatever I want to say, right? But not be owning my aggression, and then you can't tell me, hey, what did you just say? Because it was just a joke. You know, jokes are a wonderful way of doing it, or other ways, right? Other people became very trigger sensitive, and they do express their aggression very much, just because, especially men, though, it's more typical of men, but not only. There are a lot of things that affect it, and therefore you got people who have an under control of aggression, and they fly off the handle like that because they felt that it was so pent up, and it was so not acceptable, and they couldn't express it, that they didn't learn all the gradations of expressing aggression. They know only on and off. Not expressing it at all or flying off the handle. They didn't get, in order to learn to do something well, we have to have the permission in our environment to try out all kinds of ways. And then we learn, okay, when I'm upset, maybe I can say it in this way and it's acceptable, and I don't have to fly off the handle like that. I can just say it this way. But if nothing could be said at all, then there is an all or none type of a switch, right? So different people adapted in different ways, and different children of survivors will have different answers to how did I adapt to the fact that it was not allowed to express anger. Somebody will say, I became this. Somebody will say, I became that. And how this adaptation has affected my adult relationship is, that is just a little sort of map. It's a little map to use with ourselves and to use with our spouse in order to recognize, to think about, well, wait a second, let me see. I know a lot about my childhood, but if I want to think about it in this way for a moment, what did I learn? How did I adapt to it? How has it affected my relationship? How is it affecting my relationship now with you? And very important to me always is to start the dialogue or to end the dialogue, or both. I like to start with, sometimes, it depends, but it's a good idea to, in our own mind or actually verbally, to start by saying, before you want to have a very loaded conversation, I want to tell you that I'm very grateful for this and this and that in our relationship. I think that this is a good thing about all of our Jewish blessings. I looked at that thing over there, which I love, by the way, that blessing for when we have to go where. Because, think about it. I don't think that too many other cultures have such a beautiful blessing for such a simple and, in many cultures, what would be called a very base function. But even that function has this beautiful, in Hebrew it's like really phenomenally beautiful, right? Poetic, right? This poetic blessing even for that, right? And I think there is something very beautiful about the fact that before we do almost anything, we are forced by our culture to bless something good about it before. To recognize the good, to be reminded of the good, how good it is that all of the right holes are doing the right function and they're not doing something else, and all of this, right? Same in this case. It's the same point of view that is so much in our culture with the blessings. Start by saying, you know what? I want you to know that I really appreciate this and this and that about the way you are. I want to start from that, first of all. And then I have something that is important to me, that is a problem for me, that hurts me, that I would like to clear with you. But let me start with what I value about you, what I appreciate about you, or you can do it at the end of this dialogue. So we talked about a difficult thing. We talked about something that hurts me. We talked about something that I would like you to change. But what I appreciate about you is, which is again to remind ourselves and remind the other person, that it's all within a context that has also a lot of good things, and that we are aware of both the problem that we want to improve, the issue that we want to resolve. But here is something that I want to remind you, that I'm very appreciative about you in general. Sometimes what I do here is, and what I appreciate about this conversation, this dialogue that we just had, is that you listen to me so well in this dialogue, that you seem to care so much, and you were so patient, or whatever it was that one can say, that when you had a hard time, positive, and honestly, it has to be honest. If it's not honest, it's worse than not saying anything. Okay? All right, so next time my plan is to talk to you a little bit about some of the specific icebergs in the deep that are typical for children of survivors. And I can take that topic to also include a little bit about what we know from research about the third generation and what we do seem to transmit further to the third generation. And then I would like to have your input somehow. You have to let me know if you would like me to speak either next time or the time after that about sexuality in midlife.
Question. What if you have a spouse that just doesn't want to talk about feelings?
We can only try to encourage them, because the point is that if we manage to do this, the whole point of making the relationship a more conscious one is that we can become much more aware of the other person's needs. They can become more aware of our needs. We have both a better chance of actually fulfilling more of the other person's needs, so everybody wins, and not pushing on exactly the same vulnerabilities that this person carries for their entire lives. If we know what the vulnerability is, then sometimes it's easier to keep it in mind and to just kind of walk around it more carefully, more gingerly. I would just like to say, as a couple of final words, the reason I chose to show you this, describe to you this technique, or share with you some of the ideas behind it, is because emotional communication in general is very complicated in trauma-exposed families. And therefore, a lot of us have not developed the best ways of emotionally communicating with our spouses, whether it's about our needs or whether it's about some things that offend us. We don't necessarily have a good way of listening to their side. That's a real problem, which I think at this point in life, in midlife, we are actually better able to deal with than we might have been when we were younger. So it's a very good point in life to kind of stop and think about these things and do something a little bit different. We are older enough, we are stronger, we are more mature, we can do some things differently.